The instant Melania Trump leaned toward the microphone, the atmosphere inside the room subtly changed. At first, it wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no interruption, no obvious disruption. Just a quiet shift in energy that everyone seemed to notice, even if no one could immediately explain it. It carried a certain weight, calm but undeniable. The kind of tension that settles softly over a room and suddenly makes every movement, every pause, feel more significant than before. The audience had arrived expecting something polished and predictable, a controlled discussion shaped by cautious language and familiar talking points, something refined, measured, and safe. But what unfolded moved beyond those expectations almost immediately, unraveling so gradually that by the end, few people could even remember how composed everything had seemed at the start. Melania sat exactly as most people expected her to. Perfect posture, controlled expression, not a single restless movement. She didn't glance around the room or shift in her chair because she didn't need to. Her stillness alone projected confidence. It was the kind of presence developed through years under public scrutiny, calm and disciplined, suggesting authority without ever having to demand it. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett carried a very different type of composure. Where Melania's calm appeared polished and carefully maintained, Jasmine's felt natural and grounded in something more immediate. She leaned slightly forward in her seat, attentive yet relaxed, looking less like someone waiting for her turn to speak and more like someone fully prepared to engage. The moderator, unaware of the tension quietly building beneath the surface, introduced the topic casually: leadership, public responsibility, and the widening divide in how Americans viewed those in power. It was framed as a balanced discussion, designed to avoid confrontation before it could even begin. But balance only survives when both sides choose to preserve it. Melania spoke first. Her voice was soft, controlled, every sentence delivered with careful precision. She talked about dignity, about the importance of projecting strength, about how leadership was not only defined by decisions, but also by presentation, by showing the world grace instead of disorder. Her delivery was elegant, polished, and practiced to perfection. The audience listened politely, nodding along with the smooth rhythm of her words. Then Jasmine answered, and the atmosphere shifted completely. She did not mirror Melania's polished tone or refined phrasing. Instead, she grounded the conversation in reality. She spoke about ordinary people instead of appearances, about families struggling with rising costs, communities feeling ignored, citizens carrying the consequences of decisions made far away from their lives. Her language was direct, simple, and heavy with meaning. The contrast became instantly clear. One perspective focused on image, the other focused on lived experience. For a brief moment, both viewpoints existed side by side, balanced but delicate. And then Melania tilted her head slightly and spoke again, her tone still calm but sharpened just enough to redirect the conversation. "Well," she said evenly, "perhaps if more people spent time presenting this country positively instead of constantly criticizing it, we wouldn't seem so divided." It did not sound openly confrontational, but the implication was unmistakable. The reaction in the room was subtle, yet immediate. A few exchanged glances. The moderators shifted slightly in their seat. A quiet awareness spread through the audience as people sensed the conversation moving somewhere different. Jasmine did not answer right away. She allowed the statement to settle into the room before responding. And when she finally spoke, it was not with anger or aggression, but with precision. She looked directly at Melania, calm and almost thoughtful. "Do you think people are criticizing the country?" she asked softly, "or reacting to the reality they're living through?" There was no hostility in her voice, no dramatic rise in tone, just a question that completely reframed the discussion. For the briefest second, something shifted across Melania's expression. It was subtle, almost impossible to catch, but it was there. Then she quickly returned to her composed smile, leaning back slightly before answering. "Perspective matters," she replied smoothly. "There will always be challenges, but focusing on them endlessly doesn't create solutions. It creates negativity." The words seemed to hang in the air. "Negativity?" Jasmine repeated quietly, considering it for a moment. "Or honesty." A ripple moved through the audience, not loud at first, but growing steadily. Melania maintained her composure, but the balance of control had changed. The authority she carried into the room was no longer beyond question. Jasmine was no longer responding to tone. She was challenging the meaning behind the words themselves, and that altered the entire exchange. Melania leaned forward slightly now, her voice still calm, but carrying more firmness than before. "Then perhaps," she said carefully, "you should be willing to defend your perspective more directly." The room fell still again. The moderator blinked in surprise. The audience leaned closer. Jasmine did not hesitate. "I always do," she answered. For one brief moment, silence completely took over the room. Then Melania spoke once more, steady and deliberate. "Good," she said, "because I think it's time we stop speaking around each other and actually have a real debate." This time the reaction spread slowly through the audience, quiet murmurs building as people realized what had just happened. This was no longer part of the planned discussion. It was no longer carefully controlled, but it was undeniably real. A direct challenge delivered without warning, structure, or an easy escape. Every eye in the room turned toward Jasmine. And in that instant, the entire atmosphere changed, because this was no longer simply a conversation. It had become a test.